Hello, and welcome to another story from Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives, a show about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. I'm your host, Dan Dyck. Before we launch into today's story, we're going to hear the song Get On Board from the Town and Country Quartet. The song appears on an undated compact disc recorded at Faith and Life Communications in Winnipeg. If anyone out there knows when this was recorded, dash off an email to info@mharchives.ca.
Get on board, little children, get on board, little children, get on board, little children, there's room for many and more. Because the trains are coming, I hear it just at hand. I hear the car wheels rumbling and a rolling through the line. Then get on board, little children, get on board, little children, get on board, little children, there's room for many and more. I hear the train a-comin', she's a-comin' around the curve. She's a-loosin' all her steam and brakes and a-strainin' every nerve. Then get on board, little children, get on board, little children, get on board, little children, there's room for many and more. The fare is cheap and all can go, the rich and poor are there. No second class aboard this train, no difference in the fare. Then get on board, little children, get on board, little children, get on board, little children, there's room for many and more. There's room for many and more.
Our story this week comes from a man named Wilhelm Entz. Better known as Big Bill, he was a well-known figure in the Altona community and beyond. Big Bill was a jack of all trades, working many different jobs. He and his family moved frequently, but they always came back to Altona. Big Bill was known for his storytelling, which he shared via the German-language newspaper, the Steinbach Post. The Steinbach Post ran from 1913 through to 1971 and served the German-speaking Mennonite communities in Canada, USA, Mexico, and Paraguay. In addition to world news, it published many letters reporting on local people and events. In this way, readers kept up to date with far-flung relatives and friends. From 1926 to 1950, Big Bill wrote many letters to the Steinbach Post, sharing with readers his slice-of-life stories from his day-to-day adventures. His Steinbach Post reports were always signed Big Bill. They were compiled and translated by Edward Entz in 2001. The finished work comprises over 140 pages of Big Bill's writings and related information. Big Bill also wrote 2 short stories, one of which is called A Tragic Fate, or God's Ways Are Not Our Ways. The story is about Peter Dyck of Carman, Manitoba, and is the basis of today's episode. Originally written in German, it was translated by G. Pokrant. Peter Dyck of Carman was not originally from Carman. He was born in 1911 near Swift Current, Saskatchewan. His family was poor, and he frequently moved around rural Saskatchewan and Alberta as his father looked for farm work. As Peter got older, he also began traveling for work, first with his father and then on his own. In July of 1937, a young Peter traveled to Winkler for work during the harvest season. At the time, his family was living in Barnes Crossing, near Meadow Lake, Saskatchewan. When the harvest work at Winkler was finished, Peter planned to return to his friend's home in Osler, Saskatchewan. He was especially excited to see his girlfriend, Maria. Peter and his friends hopped into the back of a big truck for the journey. But shortly after leaving Winkler on the road between Carman and Elm Creek, tragedy struck. The truck was hit by a car coming from a side road. The truck flipped over. Peter was thrown clear of the accident, but the fall shattered his spine. Big Bill writes that it was 11 p.m. on September 24, 1937, when the group arrived at Carman Hospital with Peter, who was unconscious. After taking an X-ray, the doctor predicted that Peter would die within hours. But the next day, Peter was still alive. His friend sent a telegram to his family, who quickly set out for Carman. They were joined by his girlfriend Maria, who had come to visit regularly over the years. Peter was unconscious for several days, and when he woke, he was in severe pain. The news that he would never walk again brought on a deep despair, but he pushed through that first winter at Carman Hospital. When spring came, Peter grew restless. He longed to be outside, but couldn't leave his bed. He was only able to lie on his stomach, and even small movements brought on extreme pain. So he believed such excursions would be impossible, and he watched the summer pass by from his hospital room. A second winter came and went, and when spring returned, so did Peter's longing to be outdoors with the trees and the flowers. Unbeknownst to him, the nurses at Carman Hospital began puzzling out how they could take him outside. One morning, they surprised Peter by carefully carrying his bed outdoors and setting it down on the lawn, where he could enjoy the fresh air. The nurses then installed wheels on his bed, and that summer they regularly took him on excursions outdoors and into Carman. He wrote frequently to his parents in Saskatchewan, telling them all about his trips. However, nurses believed the cooler air would be bad for Peter's health, so as the seasons changed, Peter was once again confined to the hospital, where he grew gloomy over the winter. Over the next few years, Peter's summer excursions made him well known around Carman and the surrounding villages. His story generated a great deal of compassion in the community, and he was known even to people who had never met him. He spent his winters building model houses, and on his summer trips into town, he sold tickets to raffle off his creations. This was a successful business venture for him. In one of his Steinbach Post letters, Big Bill writes, "And you, Peter Dyck of Carman, are you making something to be sold? Let us know, for we regret that we could not buy enough tickets to win the last one." In August of 1943, a Mr. Friesen and a Mr. Siemens, who lived in a nearby village, paid Peter a visit at the hospital. They didn't know Peter, but had heard a lot about him in the community. During their visit, they asked Peter if there was anything he wanted that could improve his life, and Peter answered immediately. A vehicle that would enable him to get from place to place on his own. His wheeled bed allowed him to leave the hospital, but only if the nurses took him. Over the fall and winter, Friesen set about planning and building an automobile for Peter. He visited Peter again over the winter and found that Peter had also been busy drawing up plans and making models of his new automobile. When he finished those plans, he passed the rest of the winter by building a model house and visiting with Maria. By the summer of 1944, Friesen and Siemens delivered the finished automobile to the Carman Hospital. A crowd gathered to watch Peter take his first drive, and he set off for the Carman Fair. That summer, Peter took his automobile out nearly every day and frequently spent the whole day on the road. The vehicle had a simple design. It was a large wheeled platform onto which Peter's stretcher could be loaded. All of the controls were within easy reach of his hands as he laid on his stomach. It had no sides or roof, leaving Peter exposed to the elements, but the independence it gave him was life-changing. Winter came again, and Peter built another model house. He also made another new friend, J.P. Neufeld, who lived near Winkler in the village of Oosterwijk. Neufeld had heard about Peter's automobile and was fascinated, so he made the trip to Carman to see Peter. Neufeld's visit came just at the right time. The vehicle was worn out from Peter's daily drives and needed repairs. Neufeld offered to fix the vehicle and brought it back to his garage in Oosterwijk, where he puzzled over the best way to get it running again. Eventually, a neighbor suggested it might be easier to simply build a new automobile, so that's what Neufeld did. He visited Peter again, and together they drew up plans. After 3 months, it was ready. Before delivering the new automobile to Peter, Newfeld took it on a test drive through Oosterwijk. It worked perfectly, much to the delight of the village, which had turned out to watch the results of Newfeld's efforts. After his test drive, Newfeld delivered the automobile to Peter, who had already come up with a name for it. He called it the Jitney. Once again, Peter was able to spend his days driving, but the Jitney's design was still open to the elements. Peter got caught in the rain at least once, for which he received a thorough scolding from a nurse who had warned him about the weather that morning. But when the weather was clear, Peter often took the Jitney out of Carman. He visited Winkler for the first time, where a crowd gathered to greet him. He also visited Oosterwijk, where his parents had moved to be closer to him. He sold many more raffle tickets for his latest model house. Wherever he went, he often received an invitation for a meal. When the weather turned cold again, Peter was once again stuck in the hospital, but the Jitney was sturdy, and it was ready and waiting for him when spring returned in 1946. That summer, Peter traveled even farther, attending weddings and other events. But the more he drove the Jitney, the more it became clear that Peter needed a vehicle that was covered. He often ate dust while on the road, and by the time he returned to the hospital in the evenings, he was covered in dirt, or soaked to the bone if he got caught in the rain. The Jitney was too small to fit a top on it, so Peter decided that the solution was to buy a new automobile and have it modified to fit his needs. In October 1946, Peter bought a Jeep with the money he had made from selling raffle tickets, but he still needed to have it altered. He first sent it to his friend, J.P. Newfeld in Oosterwijk, only to learn that Newfeld was on a trip to Mexico and would not be able to make the necessary modifications. But Peter was able to connect with another mechanic, H. Gerbrandt, who lived south of Plum Coulee. Gerbrandt remodeled the Jeep in short order and brought it back to Carman for Peter in the spring of 1947. It was perfectly suited to his needs. The nurses could simply open the back door to slide Peter's stretcher in, and he was no longer dependent on good weather for his drives. Big Bill published the story of Peter Dyck in 1949, and by then the two had struck up a friendship. Based on one of Big Bill Steinbach Post letters, it seems that Peter even sold copies of Bill's story while he was out and about. Big Bill's story about Peter ends in 1949, but Peter's life didn't stop there. Although he lived at the Carman Hospital until his passing in 1970, photographs show that he had at least one or two more cars after the Jeep. And although he was never able to go home to Saskatchewan, he made friends wherever he went, in Carman and well beyond. Copies of Big Bill Steinbach Post letters and the story of Peter Dyck are held in the Mennonite Heritage Archives, along with numerous photos from Peter's life. To see some of these images, or to listen to this episode again, visit mharchives.ca. If you have questions or comments about this program, email us at info@mharchives.ca. Join us again next week for a story about Ollie Penner, better known as Aunt Ollie, and her popular radio program, The Children's Party.
Hello, I'm Conrad Stace, archivist at the MHA. Thanks for listening to Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives. Thanks also to our partners, Canadian Mennonite University, the Centre for Transnational Mennonite Studies, and Mennonite Church Canada. This program is made possible through support from Golden West Radio and listeners like you. If you want to support this program and the work of the archives, you can find out how to do that on our website, mharchives.ca, and click on Support.
This episode was researched by Kaylee Dyck and Conrad Stace and written by Kaylee Dyck. I'm your host, Dan Dyck. Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives will be back next week with more stories about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. Thanks for listening.